thank you for joining us on this panel discussion on the importance of ethics and sustainability in destination and influencer marketing. My name is Keith Jenkins, and I'm the CEO of iAmbassador, a content creator network and digital marketing agency. And today I'm joined by three esteemed panelists. First up, my business partner and CMO, Nick Montemaggi. Nick joined iAmbassador in 2015. And prior to that, he spent 5 years at the Emilia-Romagna Tourist Board in Italy, where he was responsible for digital PR and international online media relations. Our second panelist is Peter Jordan, the founder of Gen Z Traveler. Peter is a tourism industry and strategist and researcher with over 14 years experience in the global tourism sector. His past experience includes working at the UNWTO in Madrid and at the Pacific Asia Travel Association in Bangkok. And over the past year, he's led complex projects that have produced recommendations for cities and nations on post-COVID recovery, managing tourism growth, and sustainable tourism planning. Last but not least, my pleasure to introduce Lily Girma. Lily, I pronounced your name correctly, right? Girma.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Well done.
Thank you. Lily is Skift's global tourism reporter. A former attorney, Lily built a distinguished career as a travel journalist and photographer, and her work has been published on, amongst others, BBC, Lonely Planet, and The Guardian. Born in Ethiopia and raised in Côte d'Ivoire, and educated in the UK and in the US, Lily's life journey shapes her philosophy on tourism and responsible travel as a vehicle for cross-cultural exchange and social impact. So, right, let's get started. So in the past years actually, the impact of tourism on local communities, resources, and the environment was a hot debate. Then the COVID-19 crisis struck and the global tourism sector ground to a halt, causing a loss of income and jobs for millions around the world. A recovery is sorely needed, but can it happen in a better, more sustainable way? So in this session, we will discuss the issues affecting destinations pre-COVID, what happened during the pandemic and the lessons learned, the importance of ethics and sustainability in post-crisis recovery, and how travel influencers can assist. Should you have any questions, please post them in the question section on the right side of your screen, and we'll answer them after the panel session. So pre-COVID, it felt like tourism was growing out of control in certain parts of the world. Over-tourism, remember that, was certainly a hot topic. So my first question would be to Peter. What were the most pertinent issues?
Well, I'll pick up from what you said there, Keith, because I think the most pertinent issue, of course, it didn't affect all destinations equally, but the most pertinent issue was dealing with the consequences of rapid tourism growth. It was happening in some locations at an unsustainable pace, and that was making people in other places worried about this would come their way and that this would happen to them. On top of this, of course, a much growing awareness of the environment too, and the effects of travel on the environment. So there was also sort of partly related to this was a type of tourism which I think was concerning many people in the industry as well, which was bucket list tourism, and basically just ticking off sites as quickly as possible to get that photo, to say you'd been there, and then to move on. And that was, of course, something that consumers were doing, let's say mini influencers, people who are influencing their own friends and family every day. But of course, sometimes even those who were working in this in a professional way. And now some of this was actually causing some destination management challenges on the ground in some remote and fragile locations, especially where some people were sometimes doing some pretty stupid things in order to get a photo or a video as well. And I'm sure we all know some cases there and some pretty bad examples of what's happened.
Oh, yeah.
Then when it comes to, perhaps you can share some, well, perhaps, what we have to remember at the same time is that the organizations that are charged with dealing with this situation, what we commonly call DMOs, it could be destination marketing or management or both organizations, They were already facing some challenges. They had pressure on their finances, they had scrutiny from politicians and the public, and they had a lot of questions about their role as well that were coming in from all directions. So this was quite a challenging environment already to sort of manage reputation and handle some of the situations that were emerging.
Right. So, and then the pandemic hit and quite literally the whole world went into lockdown, right? So my next question is addressed to the group. How did DMOs and influencers react? Were there any initiatives which were noteworthy, which really caught your attention?
Yeah, I thought back to that time, and the first thing I remembered about the influencer side is a lot of them were stumped as to what to do. And it was really interesting because when you've built your whole life and identity around hopping from place to place unsustainably without any sort of, real meaningful objective, other than saying I've been to Rome or I've been to, and this and that, I think it just made them realize that suddenly they just had no voice. And I saw a lot of them just being completely stumped, even though they had thousands and thousands of followers. That was one thing. The other thing, I thought DMOs actually did a pretty good job overall. I think some of them were very quick to say, the ones that I noticed were Visit Estonia that said,
oh yeah,
stay home. And I think the other one was also Hawaii. Hawaii was one of the first that came out and said, don't come, don't visit us. I think it was like maybe a month later or something like that.
yeah.
But I do think that also on the DMO side, it was probably very difficult for them to have been in that position and suddenly not promote their destination. I mean, that's the essence of what they used to do. So.
Yeah. And well, on the influencer side, I mean, I think, there were some really, really cool initiatives. Obviously, I mean, there were, some really horrible, reckless, irresponsible behavior. Yes. But there were some really cool initiatives as well to try and support the industry. I remember Cash from Budget Traveler coming up with Adopt a Hostel, where, he encouraged people to buy vouchers, right? For
yes.
people to stay at a hostel. And I mean, and that project actually raised more than $50,000, so it was amazing. Yeah, and and then there was Lola Akimade, who came up with the Local Purse project. Yes. That was a really cool project as well. I mean, it was in collaboration with Intrepid Travel, and what they did was they basically organized tours, virtual tours. Of a city, of a place. I remember going on one of these tours to Marrakesh in Morocco.
Right.
And so it was to support the local tour guides, but also the local artisans. So this local tour guide actually took us on a tour of the markets in Marrakesh. And I bought some really cool products, argan oil and all that.
It's a really wonderful
initiative. Yeah, it was really cool.
And, I think that brings to mind that was what I thought was surprising, was that there were few of those really amazing examples of looking outward, of sort of, okay, I've been in industry for a long time. I've met so many people. How can I help now?
Yeah.
This industry, and pay it forward.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in terms of tourism and tourism marketing, are there lessons to be learned from the pandemic? This is to the group as well.
Where do we start?
Yeah.
Let me just throw one in from my side, and that is I think this was already becoming a theme and a realization on the part of DMOs and NTOs everywhere, particularly in places that were dealing with a lot of visitors and rapid tourism growth. But it's this recognition that your first responsibility is to local people and your local businesses. And of course, these are the people who you're dealing with on a daily basis, but also your local market is a very important one, and one that you have to nurture and respect and deal with. Of course, for most of the past year, that's all most destinations have been working with, but there's been some really cool initiatives that have come out of that as well. all of these different campaigns to buy local, whether that's buying online from local businesses or of course getting deliveries, all this kind of thing. And not just in food and beverages either, but also in other areas, gifts and clothing and all this kind of thing. I think that's a really important starting point. It's a local focus.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Peter. I think that a destination that caters to outsiders rather than insiders is a problem. And then we need to, I think the lesson is also, stop promoting tourism like it's some sort of colonial construct. These are people's homes. These are, people's cultures and heritage. And so I think that there's definitely a lesson coming out of this for DMOs of looking at a more holistic, way of promoting a place and not just some sort of paradise on a postcard.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's also the fact that concerning like domestic tourism, most of the time, even the locals didn't even know what they had behind their, let's say, behind their house. And a lot of DMOs worldwide were also not prepared on how to deal and to, let's say, fastly help out the local industry to recover with at least the domestic travel and the domestic travelers. And we had some examples in Europe of smaller towns, maybe in the mountains or so on, that suddenly got flooded by tourists, like domestic travelers, of course, but they weren't able to handle all of these masses, let's say. So we went from a, over tourism, mass tourism in big cities as we knew it, to mass tourism in smaller towns that for them, even 200 people in one day were like, it was like over tourism, like in little villages where only 20 people live. So that's also something that, of course, a lot of DMOs and let's say local governments are working on creating sustainable, let's say, flows and paths for the people, because we know that for the next years, social distancing might be still in place, and it's the new way of traveling. It's to travel a bit more distanciated and in more open spaces, and therefore you need to prepare also these areas and the people living there and prevent them too.
Yeah.
I think another interesting lesson is that a lot of destinations have been asked to completely reevaluate what they have. And even cities have suddenly had to start thinking a lot more about their green spaces and pushing these front and center to show that these are attractive. You've had a lot of countries, particularly in Europe, but beyond, certainly, where you've had they've suddenly had to reorganize what they're promoting, especially in terms of outdoor activities, nature, wellness. These are firm priorities in consumers' lives right now. And unfortunately, many of them, if they're handled well, can also meet some of your sustainability objectives as well. But that's been an important lesson, that in kind of rather than just constantly focusing on promoting the same thing year after year, there's been this sudden reorganization of exactly what destinations are promoting.
Yeah.
I agree with you both. I want to add that I think another important lesson for DMOs that I found from my work at Skift is that they felt that not a lot of other businesses and industries understood what tourism did for a destination. And so like in the United States, they had trouble getting funding just because it's not considered, a major industry, even though it affects every other industry, and it's linked to all of these other areas, including service industries and so on. And so, and talking to some of the DMOs, I mean, a lot of that money that comes in from tourist funds, festivals, transportation, how often you have the metro running and things that, residents might not even think about. And I think that for DMOs, they've learned that they need to market themselves better as to what they do. And that brings them the funding, and that funding affects, obviously marketing. So.
Yeah. Which actually answers a bit of my next question, which was going to be, what are the most critical challenges that DMOs will be dealing with as travel demand gradually recovers? I mean, I think you all. Way of marketing.
That would be for Peter. I think that the challenge is, right, no more, not as many heads in beds, that the whole relying on heads in beds for funding, for marketing.
Yeah.
And now having to look to other other industries to partner with and collaborate.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that's a very important starting point. Definitely, I think the most critical and the most urgent challenge that we'll see when things reopen again, and I have to say, 1 year on since we started seeing the most heavy effects of this in Europe, and we're saying, yeah, well, when things recover, and of course, this time last year, we perhaps thought this would be about 6 months, and of course, it has gone on longer, and that, of course, has brought changes in expectations as well for travelers. I think for 2021 and possibly for 2022 as well. I think the most critical challenge then, when things sort of, let's say, restart on a more broad level, let's say international travel is now possible again. Is that DMOs will have to turn to supporting their local business community. They are the people who are going to be crying out for support in different ways, small and large businesses in different. And so when that's related to people's livelihoods, especially in small businesses, and it's related to jobs, those are the priorities basically. And when I've talked to influencer communities, like the events that we've had over in recent years, that's one from the starting point as well. You have to understand what the DMO's political priorities are locally. Also, it's to activate the local domestic market, get people spending among local businesses, and generating also a bit of pride in the local area as well. But then I suppose if you turn to more marketing, sort of more looking outwards, there's going to be providing a lot of reassurance that it is safe to travel and that everyone in the destination is acting carefully and responsibly. And of course, there I think there'll be some opportunity there for working with influencers on that. And I think the only other point I wanted to mention was that international travel is going to have to start very, very carefully, and it's going to have to happen with, I think, a lot of respect for how local people feel about it, their level of comfort with that too. So I think there's going to be, on the whole, there should be, and hopefully will be, a lot more sensitivity about how local people feel about tourism and how comfortable they are with the pace of growth.
Yeah. Well, Peter, you and I both live in a city that's like in Amsterdam, which is, always a great case study, right? What can you say anything about what the Amsterdam marketing, or it's called differently now, I think.
Amsterdam and Partners, yeah.
Amsterdam and Partners, that's right. Now, has been doing the past year and how they're preparing themselves for when tourism recovers?
Yeah, to my knowledge, they've been doing a lot of, well, they've actually taken this opportunity to evaluate the visitor economy strategy. They are very open and honest about some of the challenges that the city has faced over recent years, I think in a very commendable way, actually. And so they've been working on the sustainable visitor economy strategy to 2025. It's worth looking at because, again, it's looking at much more about how we get the tourism working for the sustainable objectives of the city as a whole. So I think it's quite a good example in that sense. And there's been a certain amount of planning and management on the ground as well around some of the infrastructure and also around some of the street planning and things like that. But yeah, for the time being, it's sort of been focused on encouraging consumption in the local market and getting Amsterdammers spend in their own shops and their own takeaways and things.
Yeah. So, there's obviously lots of talk about building back better, but we all have had different ideas of what this means. Peter, to continue on what you were saying, what do you think this means in reality for DMOs?
Well, you know what, I think the important exercise actually is to actually start with having that conversation, because I think we all do have different interpretations of what that means. Some are more demanding than others, I think, when it comes to meeting sustainability criteria. But I think if this seems to be a very common feeling right now in the travel industry, I think it's important that we take the step and actually spit it out. And we say what we feel that means, and have that conversation and see where we can meet in the middle. Yeah, I have some other areas. I'm also interested, of course, to hear what the other panelists have to say on that.
Yeah. Lily,
where do we start? Yes.
Lily, you recently published a really insightful article on Skift about why tourism desperately needs a new performance metric post-pandemic.
Yes.
You shared your thoughts on building back better. What were the main points in that article?
Yes. that came out a couple of days ago, the main points were really, and as I talked to various sources, is that there's definitely that intent, you know, to want to do better and build back better. But you can't do that unless you have metrics, you know, because that's what's going to make you do, you know, from the commitment to the doing. And so what I touched on, the main points were, you know, one is obviously environmentally, you know, measuring emissions, but is that enough? You know, and it isn't. You know, we're at a point where we need every single measure for the environment, from, you know, carbon removal to having science-based targets, you know, and so on. So there's the environmental side, and then there's the social side. And, you know, that brings in issues of equity and the way that tourism was even born. And so how can we rebuild something if we don't go back and look at how it came to be? And with COVID, you know, making inequalities even worse than what it was before, and it was already pretty bad. You can literally, I mean, it doesn't take, you know, it's not science. I mean, you can go to any destination in low to middle income countries and see, you know, where the equity imbalance is. And so I think it's sort of the elephant in the room that no one in tourism is addressing, except for recently South Africa tourism, which decided to set up a fund, you know, partly financed by banks, where they would, they required, like, I think maybe 51% Black ownership of a tourism business or project.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, you know, obviously there are pros and cons, but that's a huge step forward in recognizing or even acknowledging the fact that, you know, people of color were starting with less advantage, you know, and that tourism is predominantly owned by, you know, by white people. So I think that just these uncomfortable conversations, you know, and it's just, you know, for most people, but it needs to be, it has to be had. And so that's part of it. And just having a plan, you know, I think that most destinations now are realizing, okay, what's my role in this? And what's my sustainable management plan? Do I have one? You know, or do I need to revise it? And how do I determine what's, you know, what should go in there? And like Peter said, it all starts with what do the residents want and what do the locals want, you know?
Yeah.
Having that vision and crafting that vision, getting people involved, and then this is the big step as well, which is the stuff that takes years, but it's sharing that vision and helping ensure that it's fully understood across the destination. And then, of course, when it comes to the different partners that you work with, in particular, for example, in influencer marketing, help making sure that they understand this too. It's not just something you keep in a drawer; it's something that you're sharing all the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's something you share all the time. Sorry.
Yeah, well, no, which brings me to my next question. And I mean, you know, we've seen in the past that influencers or travel bloggers, content creators can play a vital role in crisis recovery. That's how iAmbassador actually started with the Arab Spring back in 2011. And it was our very first campaign with the Kingdom of Jordan. But this time around, you know, what will the influencer community need to keep in mind? You know, what can they do this time around to play a meaningful role in crisis recovery? Perhaps Nick?
Yeah, I think also to come back also to the question before asking it, you, I think, said the word for me, which is like preparing. I mean, what we see is that DMOs need to be prepared. And now, like Lily and Peter said, it needs to be a plan that you have to look at different, of course, like data, where that it goes from the environment to how the local, you know, environment is also of the people and like of the businesses and the ownerships. Also because unfortunately, we know and we are already seeing that a lot of businesses ran out of business, so they don't exist anymore and won't exist anymore. So they need to be rebuilt in a way. And concerning the influencers, of course, they need to be in a way also aware of what is going on in a certain destination, what's the plan is there. But I think that even more now, we need like a global, let's say, plan. Also like on European level, we saw that every country, if we take the example of last summer, every country did a bit their own thing, right? They created corridors. You went to one country, they had this rule. You went to the other country, they had another rule. Then within the country, areas had even more different rules. So I think the role of the influencer is also to be able to communicate, especially if you're an expert in a theme or even an area. And I think we go back again to the domestic travel and to why it's important to work with local influencers to help out, to show what are the rules of engagement, let's say, in that time. Because the issue is that then we risk again to create a lot of confusion. And when people are confused, especially travelers, then I think the ones suffering is, of course, the local people and the local businesses and everything. So you create a bit this news where maybe, then you have last minute cancellations or, and then, I mean, we can have another, of course, panel about even like the last minute bookings, of course, because this will be the trend for sure for the next months and I guess year. And so that the demand will be even more like faster and like last minute, because it's not easy. And influencers, in a way, I think they need really to, in some cases, maybe stop to look only at themselves or the way they traveled as well, because we also, like Lily said before, I think even within influencers, many of them were privileged because the average person doesn't travel like they do. So get more in the shoes of the real traveler and to live and experience a particular destination like the travelers would do, and not like you would do as a travel writer, hopping, from plane to plane and going from destination to destination. So, of course, like Lily said, we need to go back step a bit backward. And why did tourism start and how did it start? It was more a slow thing of, getting to know a culture, a local place and a destination rather than a fast use.
Yeah, well, excellent points, Nick. Yeah.
Yeah, so many great points. I
Yeah.
love what you said, to put yourself in the shoes of the everyday traveler.
Yeah.
What happened to that? When did it go from just being a traveler to, posing in 10 outfits in front of a red door or something? Like, it just, there's a huge disconnect there. Obviously, that's not everyone, but there's a lot of that. And how did we get there is the question.
Yeah. Yeah. So, when it comes to influencer marketing, it's, well, I guess, marketing in general, tourism marketing, ethics is definitely a big focus point, I think, going forward. Sustainability for sure. How can a DMO, but also an influencer or a content creator incorporate ethics and sustainability in their marketing or in the content they produce?
For DMOs, I think that, and this goes to what Nick said, it's, they have to incorporate local content creators. I just think it's not possible anymore to just sideline them and bring in, the foreign influencers, even though it's about numbers and it's about reach and audience and all of that. But I think that they absolutely need to balance it out. Yeah. And now is a really great opportunity because everyone's interested in backyard tourism, and a lot of these local influencers will have better knowledge of their backyard.
Yeah.
And so I think that they should promote slow travel. We're already seeing that a lot of the DMOs are looking at remote workers and bringing in people to just stay longer, and I think not just remote workers, I think they should just encourage people to find a way to encourage them to stay longer. I think they need to be promoting, locally made products, local businesses, fair trade, small to medium enterprises. A lot of them have suffered so much, and like Nick was saying, they're probably gone by now, many of them. And I think that they just need to look at tourism as a tool for social development more, and in a way, a lot of people look to the DMOs. I mean, it doesn't matter who's traveling. I mean, the first thing you do is Google the destination, and then it says, visit, I don't know, visit Finland or visit, and so why not use that advantage and make it prominent that this is the time to, uplift our economy, and this is how you can do it. So, and for influencers, I think that a lot of them need to have much better context of the places they're going. I think that people are going to look at them with a microscope going forward. It's going to be so important to have integrity and to just tell it like it is, with context, and not shy away from the tough topics, because a lot has changed.
I agree, Lily. I also think that, and it sounds quite deep, I suppose, but to say that tourism does have an ethical dimension, of course it does. The UNWTO issued the Global Code of Ethics, I think, about 25 years ago, also. But the interesting thing about it's perhaps not what most influencers may feel comfortable with, or what many people who've perhaps the privileged, or those who've found their work quite easy to date, is to find that tourism does have digs up some very complicated issues, and I think you've touched on those really well. And so like you say, people are going to be looking at this closely. These subjects are going to have to be handled with a lot more sensitivity. We've seen COVID, but we've also seen many social justice issues that have arisen in a very big dramatic way over the past year. Yeah. And it's not enough just to look pretty and take a photo and say something rather vapid about it and move on, because you will be called out, I guess.
Yeah. Yes, and I just want to include that to speak to what Peter just said. I think part of that is also having more multicultural messaging. It's huge. I mean, as we've seen, like recently, not just last year's Black Lives Matter, but also this year now, the attacks on Asians in America. And so, and also, I mean, there's lots of surveys coming out now where it says the consumers care about multicultural messaging, and that, they will pick destinations that show it and that embrace it. So there's no avoiding that.
And they'll call out those that don't as well.
They will call out, yeah. Not fun.
Yeah.
No, but that's the world we're in now.
Yeah. And it's very easy these days with social media to call out.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a complicated area to work in, and as this is also, by the way, I think something that DMOs have to keep in mind, because I know that they're often the ones who are, let's say, not dictating the content, but they have quite a strong hand in this matter, and it's something that they also have to be sensitive to in their local community and the type of messages that they're giving.
Yeah, I think Lily brought up a really excellent point just now about when someone wants to travel somewhere and they Google the destination, and in many instances the visit whatever Finland in this case pops up at the top or something. I mean, obviously you get a lot of travel bloggers who are really good at SEO and always are at the top, sometimes in most cases actually even above the DMO. So I think a lot of the responsibility is on the travel bloggers as well, the content creators who are who have their content at the top of the search results, to also go back and look at their content and see what they can do to improve, to reflect the diversity of the destination, to perhaps even to collaborate with local content creators or influencers to improve that content, to present a more representative message. I mean, they're at the top of the search results. So
yeah. Such a great point. Absolutely, totally.
Yeah. Well, back to DMOs, Peter. So I mean, there's a lot of stuff that DMOs will have to think about. So what do you think the priority should be?
I think, and I know that this is tough because money and resources have been tough. A lot of them have been working with reduced human resources as well over the past year, staff furloughed and things. But I think, first of all, they're going to have to be acting a lot more carefully and responsibly in the future with their own budget, with the way that they organize fan trips and blogger visits, for example, and but especially also the way their own organization makes an impact on the environment and the community with the money that they have control over. So they can set quite a strong example with the things that they're prepared to spend on and the things they're not prepared to spend on as well, and make that a lot clearer. They also then, in justifying that, they have to be much clearer upfront about their sustainability objectives. As Lily pointed out, explaining this to local people, because explaining their own role and selling themselves, but also then with the partners you're working with as an organization. Don't be afraid to share these, and I've said this for many years now, don't be afraid to share this stuff with influencers that you work with. Send them your strategy, send them your sustainability vision so that they understand this, they can incorporate it in their own work, and that they can understand you even have one, and this is what you're trying to achieve. And of course, then there's a creativity side, which is about finding new ways to tell the story, and because indeed, your audience care about what you're saying, and your local residents care about what you're saying. So you're much more going to be, I think, as a DMO in the role of a mediator.
Yeah. And do you see? Well, this is actually to Nick and Lily. Do you see a shift in how the tourism industry will collaborate with influencers going forward, or even the type of influencer they choose to collaborate with?
I think it is changing. I don't have a specific example, but I do think that there are conversations happening about sensitivity and about picking influencers who are, not just have high numbers, but have, basically a balance between, what they promote in terms of travel, but also in the messaging and how they connect with their audience. And I think it's just, they're going to focus on those who are a lot more transparent and are, not just about the superficial side of travel. Because right now, it's not just, marketing the destination anymore, even for DMOs. It's really health and safety first now. So it's balancing that, travel, but also be safe. And so I think they're going to be a lot more careful in terms of who they select to promote their destination at this time. It's getting very competitive, and having the right person giving that right messaging of it's okay to come here is I think is going to be their focus.
Yeah. So it's all about, messaging.
Yes, I think so. It's all about the influencers, transparency, messaging, ability to connect and really be real. I think they're going to go for that more than, folks who change outfits 10 times. But maybe that's wishful thinking. I don't know.
Well, I do hope so.
I know.
I completely agree, Lily, with you, because as you said even before, it's just not anymore about numbers. We need to show that we do stuff, and let's just look at the numbers. But it's really like also what Keith said before, look at the people that already have a valuable voice about your destination, that are ranking in this case on top of the searches even more than the visit, destination X, and start to work with them. And it's, again, like you said, Lily, before, even here, data analysis plays a key role. Like with iAmbassador, what we're doing now with some of our clients, we are starting to prepare already the field, let's say like that. When travel slowly reopens again, we are at the moment, what we're doing, we are looking at what are the pieces of content that are, written better from a transparent point of view, sustainable point of view, but as well from a data analysis point of view that people go on to look at and read when they search for a particular destination. And let's start to not really re-edit those, but to make the blogger aware, to communicate the right message, and especially concerning the health and safety, what are the measures in place in that destination. So it's really about getting back again, not to say only that's where the coolest spot to take the photo to change your outfit is, but it's like that's how you can travel safely in that destination, and how you can help the local community in making your trip like sustainable, both from an economic point of view, but as well from what you live in the destination. Because a big problem, and I think Keith and Peter can agree with that, of Amsterdam was that pre-pandemic, that people came, used the city and left a mess, right? So
It's not the only European city where that's happened, and
Right.
yeah, and unfortunately, or the only city in the world. It's also a city where people live and they work, and it's a city with its complicated side, like many other cities, of course. But I think to come back to a point that Lily made earlier about wishful thinking, I think that perhaps some of this is wishful thinking, but I think that those who do make mistakes, or those who kind of basically do stupid things, or especially they show something that is unsafe or that their viewers feel very uncomfortable about, they're going to find that they end up in much deeper water than they used to. The media used to pay attention to this. I mean, we're known about the case of some UK influencers that went off to Dubai, had a great time while everyone else was stuck at home in the past few months over the winter, European winter. That's just a small example of the kind of backlash that can happen. So again, it's just another reason why people are going to have to tread with a lot more care in the future.
Yeah. So when you're going to work with an influencer or content creator, any recommendations for best practices on how to select the right ones to work with? This is to the group.
That's unique.
Well,
yeah, let's hear it.
Like, I mean, as said, like do your research before, like really see what this particular person like maybe already wrote or created about your destination, and in case not, like look at how this influencer like puts him or herself in front of the camera and to the audience. Like Lily said before, is it about changing outfits, or like Peter said, doing dangerous things? Yeah. Or is it more of being like real, transparent, honest, and also to really care for the local community? Even with iAmbassador, we are seeing that the clients we work with, they really tend to ask to us to work with people that they can get along with, also from a, you know, I wouldn't say like you know, a mentality point of view, but more that they share the same values, right? About local culture, like how to help the local industry too, and not just about how to bring foreign people there and that's it. So yeah.
Values, I love that, having the same values. Yeah,
having the same values. Well, on that note, it's crazy, but we've actually we've been talking now for close to 45 minutes, so
wow.
that's amazing. Wow, it just flew by so quickly. I would like to thank all of you for joining this panel and sharing your thoughts on ethics and sustainability, and you know, post-COVID recovery strategies, I guess, you know, and what are the important points going forward. Thanks so much to Nick and to Lily and to Peter. So before I close, we'll start to answer your questions in the chat box to the right of your screen after this session. But before we go there, I would like to draw your attention to the Social Travel Forum, which we organized in Graz in 2019. Actually, it was in 2019, and Peter actually wrote the report that came out of that forum. And it was in 2019, and we were discussing a lot of these issues, which we've just talked about in the past 45 minutes. So it's a great read. I will put the link in the chat box, and please read it, because there are some really cool takeaways from that report. So thank you once again, and well, take care, stay safe, and hopefully we'll all be traveling soon safely. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, everybody.